Darkness, heavy, suffocating, absolute. A faint sound of breathing, shallow, frantic, fills the silence. Then a voice, trembling but alive. I remember the laughter first. I thought it was the nurses. A pause. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the hospital anymore. The air feels thick with dampness, clinging to his face like a shroud. Mark Reynolds blinks into the pitch-black void, his chest heaving, lungs burning. The smell of soil, fresh, wet, and choking, invades every breath. He moves his hand and feels something solid, wooden, inches from his face. His pulse spikes. He's enclosed, trapped. And then he hears it again, that faint, echoing laughter. Somewhere above him, somewhere outside. The narration cuts in softly, deliberate, the calm voice of reason against the chaos. Mark Reynolds, a 42-year-old paramedic from Ohio, was no stranger to death. He'd pronounced it, witnessed it, even held it in his hands countless times. But nothing could have prepared him for the night he became its mystery. This isn't the retelling of a ghost story. It's the documented account of a man declared dead by hospital standards, buried overnight, and later found alive. We cut to flashes of monitors, sterile light, and a digital flatline. The heart monitor emits its final tone, that long, unwavering note that signifies the end. A nurse whispers something. Someone removes gloves. The world goes still. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. Then silence again. But the silence doesn't last. Somewhere in that silence, something stirred. Mark recalls that first sensation after death. Pressure on his chest, the sound of distant wind, the muffled rhythm of raindrops above him. At first, he thought he was dreaming. He felt weightless, floating, but the illusion collapsed when his fingers brushed the coffin's interior. That's when the panic took hold. He tried to scream, but his throat was raw, dry. The laughter, faint, childlike, grew louder, overlapping with the pounding of his own heartbeat. His vision blurred. Every instinct screamed that this couldn't be real. And yet, the soil pressing against the coffin lid told him otherwise. The narrator continues. In the official records, Mark Reynolds was clinically dead. No pulse, no oxygenation, no brain activity detected by EEG. By every medical metric, life had ceased. But hours later, somewhere beneath the ground, something within him reignited. A spark, a convulsion. A reawakening science couldn't yet explain. Intercut images flicker across the mind's eye. Storm clouds over an old cemetery, flashlights glinting off rain-soaked gravestones, distant sirens. The voice returns, calm but haunted. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I thought I was in hell. But the laughter made me think maybe I wasn't alone. This moment, the impossible awakening, becomes the heartbeat of our story. What happened in those lost hours? How does a man cross the line between life and death? And return? The scene lingers in that question. Medicine versus mystery. Logic versus the unexplainable. The human mind, searching for meaning in the darkness. The narrator closes the section softly, leaving the question hanging like the last echo of breath in a sealed room. If death has a sound, could it be laughter? Before that night, before the laughter, before the coffin, Mark Reynolds was known for his steadiness under pressure. Colleagues at the Toledo Emergency Medical Service described him as the calm in chaos. When someone's heart stopped, Mark was the one people turned to. He was methodical, confident, deeply empathetic. The irony that a man who spent his life reviving others would one day be pronounced dead himself is not lost on anyone who knew him. He lived a quiet life in suburban Ohio with his wife, Emily, and their teenage daughter, Chloe. Family photos show weekend camping trips, birthday candles, and a man whose smile seemed unbreakable. But beneath that image, something had begun to shift. Months before his death, Mark had been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition known as autoimmune myocarditis, a disorder where the body's own immune system mistakenly attacks the heart muscle. It's rare, unpredictable, and potentially fatal. Doctors explained that inflammation could cause his heart to swell, interfering with its electrical signals. In layman's terms, the wiring could short out without warning. Mark understood the risks. He was trained to read ECGs, to interpret heart rhythms, to see in sharp data what others saw as mystery. Yet, he chose to keep working, quietly monitoring his symptoms, believing he could manage it. Emily recalls the day it happened, an unremarkable Tuesday in late autumn. He'd just finished a 12-hour shift, she says. He told me his chest felt heavy, but brushed it off. He said he'd seen worse. Now, that night, he collapsed at the paramedic station. His partner, Tom Jenkins, began CPR immediately. We did everything right, Tom remembers. 40 minutes. We used every tool, every drug. There was nothing. He was gone before we reached the hospital. At 11:47 p.m., Mark was officially declared dead. His colleagues wept. Emily, unable to comprehend it, remembers clutching his wedding ring, still warm from his hand. He was so alive that morning, she says softly. How can someone just stop? The narrator's voice enters, calm but heavy with reflection. Medicine defines death as the irreversible cessation of all vital functions. Heartbeat, breathing, brain activity. But in Mark's case, those lines would blur in ways no one could anticipate. His body was transferred to the hospital morgue that night, awaiting autopsy. But fate, and a storm that would knock out power to the facility, had other plans. This section paints the portrait of a man caught between two worlds, the rational and the unknown. A man of medicine who trusted science, until science failed to explain his own story. As Emily would later say, he always believed there was an answer for everything. But after that night, I think even he started to doubt that. The question remains, when a man so familiar with death experiences it firsthand and returns. The storm rolled in without warning, thick black clouds swallowing the Ohio sky, winds carrying the smell of rain and earth. Power lines flickered, then went dark. In the hospital morgue, backup generators struggled to hum to life. The refrigeration units failed. With the storm predicted to worsen, the small-town coroner made a decision. The bodies scheduled for transfer the next morning would be temporarily buried in protective caskets in the old Pine Hollow Cemetery to prevent decomposition. It was a practical choice, procedural by the book. But that decision would become the center of one of the most haunting medical mysteries ever recorded. Mark's body, covered carefully with a sheet, showed no signs of life. No pulse, no electrical activity. Every monitor had confirmed it. His chest bore the marks of defibrillator pads, the faint bruises of CPR. Two orderlies prepared the transfer in silence, rain tapping gently against the morgue windows. By midnight, the hearse made its way through the downpour, tires carving through mud and water until it reached the cemetery on the edge of town. They laid him to rest quickly. The coffin was sealed, the earth packed down. The wind screamed through the bare trees as lightning cracked across the distant horizon. Then everything fell still. Hours passed. The rain softened. In that silence, something stirred beneath the soil. From inside the coffin, Mark felt pressure on his chest. A crushing weight. He gasped, or thought he did, but the air was thick and stale. His heart hammered against his ribs, as his brain fought to process the impossible. He was conscious, alive, buried. His eyes opened into blackness. The realization hit him like fire. He was underground. He tried to move his arms to push, but there was nowhere to go. The wood above him felt close, almost touching his face. Panic coursed through him. His breaths came shorter, ragged, and every inhale tasted of dirt. And then, faintly, he heard it again. Laughter, distant, melodic, echoing somewhere above him. At first, he thought it was memory, the nurses from the ER, the sound of life bleeding into a dream. But as seconds stretched into minutes, he realized the sound wasn't inside his mind. It was around him, traveling through this ground, playful and cruel. The laughter of children. Medical narration breaks in, the calm voice of reason layered over the claustrophobic scene. In rare cases, the human body can resume vital signs after death has been declared, a phenomenon known as Lazarus syndrome. Named after the biblical figure resurrected by Christ, it describes the spontaneous return of circulation after failed resuscitation. Scientists believe trapped air in the lungs or delayed drug reactions can trigger a final surge of heart activity, but such recoveries usually occur within minutes, not hours. Not in a sealed coffin underground. As dawn approached, the storm cleared. Two groundskeepers arrived to assess flood damage. That's when they noticed something odd. Disturbed earth near one of the fresh graves. Mud shifted in uneven mounds, as though the ground itself had risen. One man knelt, pressing his ear to the soil, convinced he heard a muffled thump. They began to dig. Minutes later, they uncovered the casket. The lid bore cracks from the inside, splintered by frantic blows. When they pried it open, they found Mark. Eyes open, gasping, skin a ghostly shade of blue. His pulse fluttered weakly. His lips trembled as he tried to speak. The paramedics leaned in close. "Why are they laughing?" he whispered. The men exchanged terrified glances. There was no one else in the cemetery. No sound but the wind through the trees. That question would haunt every person involved for years. A fragment of consciousness from a man science had already pronounced gone. What does he bring back with him? In the days that followed, disbelief rippled through the medical community. News outlets reported it as a miracle. Hospital, careful and defensive, called it a rare postmortem physiological event. But behind the press statements and medical jargon, the truth was far stranger. No one could explain how Mark Reynolds, clinically dead for nearly 6 hours, had awakened underground with enough strength to fight his way toward the surface. Mark was transferred to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, where a team of specialists assembled. Neurologists, cardiologists, forensic pathologists. Each brought their own theory, each determined to uncover the mechanism behind his survival. Blood tests, imaging, EEGs, cardiac ultrasounds, every scan came back normal. No sign of brain damage, no organ failure. The only evidence that anything unusual had occurred were bruises on his knuckles and faint abrasions on his fingertips, marks left from clawing at the coffin lid. His attending physician, Dr. Priya Shah, stood before a panel of reporters 2 weeks later. "We had every reason to believe he was gone," she said. "Every monitor, every test agreed. There was no heartbeat, no oxygen, no neurological activity. And yet, here he is. Her voice faltered slightly on that last line, as if even she couldn't quite believe it. The documentary narration returns, tone analytical but measured. Science demands explanations, and 3 possibilities emerged. The first, Lazarus syndrome, a spontaneous restoration of circulation. Some experts suggested a delayed effect from the medications used during resuscitation. Adrenaline, when trapped in the bloodstream, can suddenly surge once pressure in the chest normalizes, restarting the heart. But even that couldn't account for a 6-hour gap. The second theory, catalepsy, a state where the body becomes rigid and motionless, mimicking death. Patients in cataleptic states can exhibit no measurable pulse, no respiration, and even register flat EEGs due to reduced neural activity. Historically, cases of premature burial have been linked to cataleptic misdiagnosis, but modern technology should prevent such errors. Should, but apparently didn't. The third explanation was psychological, psychogenic coma, where the mind essentially shuts down in response to trauma or fear, reducing all physiological function to the barest minimum. In rare instances, victims can remain in this state for hours, only to awaken spontaneously. Yet again, there were no neurological traces to support it. Mark himself remembered fragments, flashes of sound and color, laughter echoing through a dark tunnel, a child's voice calling his name. "Oh, I thought I was hallucinating," he told investigators. "But it felt real, like someone was with me, guiding me back." Forensic specialists re-examined the case records, searching for procedural flaws. Any sign of misdiagnosis or technical failure? None were found. The ECG logs showed no heartbeat. The resuscitation efforts had followed every medical standard. It was, in every way, a legitimate death, followed by something no one could quantify. As weeks passed, the debate widened beyond the hospital. Ethicists questioned the protocols used to declare death. Journalists demanded accountability. Religious leaders called it proof of the divine. And yet, amid all the theories, one fact remained. Mark Reynolds was alive, and no one could explain why. He returned home, frail but alert, his eyes shadowed with something deeper than fatigue. "They keep telling me I came back," he said quietly in an interview. "But sometimes it still feels like I never left." The mystery had only just begun. For most people, survival would have meant celebration, a second chance, a new beginning. But for Mark Reynolds, waking up was only the start of a different kind of torment. The body had healed, the mind had not. In the months following his resurrection, Mark withdrew from almost everything that once defined him. The laughter, the same sound that had haunted him underground, followed him home. He heard it at night, faint but unmistakable. Sometimes it came from the hallway outside his bedroom. Other times, from the backyard where no one stood. It wasn't menacing, not exactly. It was playful, distant, and cruelly familiar. Emily noticed the change almost immediately. He stopped sleeping, stopped working. The paramedic, who once ran toward emergencies, now couldn't stand the sound of an ambulance siren. He wouldn't go near the hospital, she recalls softly. Even driving past it made him panic. Their daughter, Chloe, would sometimes find him sitting awake at 3 a.m., staring out the window as if waiting for something. He said they were there, Emily adds, and that he could still hear them laughing. Psychiatrists labeled it post-resuscitation syndrome, a documented but poorly understood condition affecting patients who have been revived after cardiac arrest. The brain, deprived of oxygen, can create vivid hallucinations or auditory distortions as it tries to process trauma. But Mark's case confounded experts. His scans showed no hypoxic brain damage, no lesions, no chemical imbalance to explain the persistent voices. Dr. Shah, his physician, spoke carefully during follow-up sessions. "What you're experiencing," she told him, "may not be external. It's your mind replaying fragments of what you remember." Mark wanted to believe her, but sometimes, late at night, the sound grew so loud it drowned out his thoughts. Once he recorded it, the faint echo of children laughing. When the audio was analyzed, nothing was detected but wind. Friends urged him to move on, to see it as a miracle rather than a curse. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he'd brought something back. "I used to comfort the dying," he said in a recorded interview. "Now I wonder if I ever truly came back myself." The narration softens, allowing silence to hang between words. Trauma, the voice explains, can reshape memory, blurring the edges between reality and perception. Survivors of near-death experiences often describe sensations that linger: a light, a voice, a presence. Science calls them hallucinations. Faith calls them messages. Mark called them echoes. He began keeping a journal detailing every episode, every sound, every dream. The laughter appeared most often when he felt calm, not afraid, as if waiting for him to let his guard down. "Maybe they're not mocking me," he wrote once. "Maybe they're reminding me of where I've been." But whether those echoes came from his mind, or somewhere beyond, no one could say. What was clear was that death had changed him, not just physically, but at a level no MRI could capture. Time passed, but peace never fully returned. 3 years after his burial, Mark Reynolds was still haunted. Not by nightmares, but by questions. The laughter had softened with time, more like an echo than a voice now, but it never disappeared. It was a presence that seemed to hover just beyond comprehension. And so, rather than run from it, Mark decided to understand it. He began researching near-death experiences, NDEs, with the same methodical focus he once brought to emergency medicine. He pored over case studies, medical journals, and personal testimonies. He contacted survivors from across the country, people who had been clinically dead and revived. To his astonishment, several described hearing voices during their time away. Some spoke of laughter. Others recalled music, whispers, or indistinct chatter that felt welcoming rather than frightening. "I thought I was losing my mind," one woman told him. "But when I heard other people talk about it, I realized maybe we all bring something different back." Mark met with both scientists and spiritual leaders, seeking answers in places where medicine and mysticism overlapped. A neuroscientist from Boston explained that as the brain shuts down, neurons fire erratically, creating vivid auditory and visual sensations. "It's the brain's last fireworks," she said. What people interpret as heaven or voices might just be electricity fading in the dark. But then he met Reverend Thomas Leland, a former chaplain who'd comforted hundreds of dying patients. The Reverend listened quietly as Mark described the laughter. Then he smiled gently and said, "Some cultures believe the dead are greeted by the laughing spirits, guardians who test whether your soul is ready to move on. Maybe they weren't mocking you, Mark. Maybe they were waiting for you to laugh back." That idea stayed with him. The documentary weaves through footage of Mark's study, shelves lined with books on consciousness, spirituality, quantum theory. His journal entries become more introspective. He no longer asked why he came back, but what it meant. He began giving lectures at medical schools, telling his story not as a miracle, but as a lesson in humility. "Sometimes," he told a room of future doctors, "we close the curtain too soon. Death might not be a wall. It might be a door we don't yet know how to see through." Emily watched the transformation quietly. He still heard it, she said in an interview, but it didn't scare him anymore. He started to think maybe it wasn't haunting him, maybe it was guiding him. Through interviews and narration, the documentary explores how cultures across the world interpret death's threshold. In Native American lore, laughter marks the soul's acceptance into the spirit world. In ancient Egyptian texts, the newly dead must face voices that test their truth. Science may call it hallucination, but mythology calls it passage. By the time Mark turned 46, the laughter had become almost comforting, a strange reminder of the space between worlds. "It's not something I'll ever explain," he said softly. "But maybe it's not meant to be explained. Maybe it's meant to be heard." The voiceover closes gently. "Some mysteries are not solved. They are lived." And Mark Reynolds, the man who died and came back, was still listening. It is dawn in Ohio. The fog clings to the grass like breath on glass, and a thin ray of sunlight pierces through the gray. The cemetery is quiet now. No wind, no thunder, no laughter. Just the rustle of trees and the faint hum of morning. Mark Reynolds walks slowly along the narrow gravel path, his step steady, his face calm. He carries nothing with him but a small white flower. This is the first time he's returned to Pine Hollow since that night. Years have passed, yet his hands still tremble as he approaches the grave. His grave. The one that once held him between two worlds. The marker reads simply, Mark Reynolds, 1981-2023. Beneath it, someone had once written, "Gone too soon." Now, he kneels before it, brushing away the dirt, and whispers, "Not soon enough." The narrator's voice enters softly, reflective. Time has dulled the terror, but not the mystery. Mark is alive, but life itself feels different now. Fragile, borrowed, unpromised. He has accepted that he may never fully understand what happened in those 6 hours, whether it was a biological fluke, a medical oversight, or something far beyond the realm of science. It changed the way he sees everything. "I used to think death was the end," he says quietly. "Now I think it's a boundary, one we only cross when we stop listening." He places the flower on the grave, stands, and looks out over the fog-drenched rows of stone. The camera lingers on his face as the faintest smile flickers there. Not joy, but understanding. He breathes in deeply, almost reverently, as though inhaling life itself. And then, somewhere beyond the trees, faintly, the laughter returns. It's softer now, almost like the sound of children playing in the distance. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't run. He simply listens. For a long moment he stands perfectly still, eyes closed, letting the sound wash over him. There is no fear anymore, only acceptance. The narration continues, its tone low and haunting. Science can measure a heartbeat, chart a brainwave, and capture the final breath. But it cannot measure what lingers beyond that breath, the part of us that remembers, that wonders, that refuses to let go. Mark turns back one last time and whispers, "Thank you." Whether it's gratitude for life, or acknowledgement of something unseen, we'll never know. He walks away slowly, the fog swallowing his figure until he fades from view. As the screen darkens, the distant laughter continues, fading, then blending with the whisper of wind. A voice, his voice, echoes faintly, Maybe they weren't laughing at me. Maybe they were welcoming me back. A final pause. The narrator concludes in a tone both chilling and tender. In the end, perhaps the line between life and death isn't meant to be crossed. Only heard. The sound of laughter fades into silence, and then nothing.